All right, Maiden Voyage. Let's hit him with some of these sus chords. Huh. That shape didn't sound like what I thought it was going to. All right, that's enough sus. What else can I play on this? I know, let me try some of those minor pentatonic patterns I've been working on. Now, on this F chord, is that a C minor pentatonic or G minor pentatonic? What? I'm at the bridge already? All right, finally a minor chord. Maybe if I just play a lot of notes, they'll forget about the last 16 bars. What's up, everyone? Today, we're digging into a type of harmony that for a long time in my own playing, and I think for a lot of students and even professional players, can present a challenge, and that is sus chords. As we heard up top in that hypothetical chorus of Maiden Voyage, on this type of chord, it's really easy to sort of get stuck in your own head as an improviser. This is because sus chords provide a lot of different avenues that we can go to find different sounds to improvise over top of them. Are we going to think minor pentatonics? Maybe major 7 sounds based off of the flat 7. Some of the sus shapes that are embedded in this chord. Or maybe just straight up Mixolydian. This flexibility is one of the things that makes improvising over sus chords so interesting. But it can also be a trap. And if you're a player, especially like me, who tends to be a little stuck in your own head when you're improvising, you can sort of end up going in a million directions rather than just playing clear ideas in one direction. Today, we're going to break down a couple of the options that are available to you and think about some ways that we can practice applying them in our solos. As with every week, if you'd like a bit of extra support practicing this stuff, head on over to Patreon, check out the stuff that's in the virtual studio. There's a great handout and an additional practice lesson that goes along with all this material to really get that sus chord playing under your fingers. Before we jump into things today, there's one term that I want to talk about, and that is the term an avoid note. I know for me as a younger improviser, this is something many of my teachers reference, whether it is the 4th on a dominant 7th chord or a major 7th chord, or in this case, the major 3rd on a sus chord. Sometimes this term avoid note is used to kind of guide students away from a note that might have a little bit of crunch, a little bit of tension in the chord. Now, this is not a term that I like and a term that I never use with my students because there really are no avoid notes. It's all about thinking that that note has tension and wants to resolve. And I know for me as a younger improviser, I would really get stuck because I would be so focused on not playing the avoid notes because they had been made seem that they were wrong or sort of like the wrong answer as improvisers, that sometimes disrupted my thinking and disrupted my lines. We want to think that these notes, yes, do have tension. If you play a 4th scale degree on a major 7 chord or on a dominant chord, it is going to have some tension, have some dissonance. It wants to resolve, but by no means is that bad. Let's look at a little example here with our sus chords. So here our quote unquote avoid note, and again, that is not a term that I ever use when I'm teaching and something that I think we should all just dispel from our vernacular. It would be the major 3rd. So let's check this out. We have a D sus chord to start with. We're going to look at the tune Maiden Voyage and some of the chords that are present in that tune. So that would be an F sharp. So I'm going to play this idea. Now in a vacuum, that's a nice sounding idea. Once we put that with the chords, we might hear a little bit of a rub, a little bit of a crunch on that F sharp on the top, but it's tension and then it resolves in the next measure. Now, if we don't want that tension, we could take a very similar idea and just build it in a slightly different way so we resolve to a more consonant note. Again, we're not so much trying to avoid the F sharp in this next idea. I'll play the F sharp, but it's working more as a passing note in this case because I don't want that dissonance. I would argue that either one of these ideas is great. The first one has a little more tension with that F sharp. The second one is a little bit more resolved, but both of them are going to sound good. And we really don't want to get in the habit of, I can't play a major third on a sus chord. You certainly can. You just have to handle it with care. If it's a long note, you probably want to make sure it resolves after it. If it's a passing note, who cares? Nobody's going to notice that temporary little bit of dissonance in the same ways if we were playing a major chord and we happen to play the fourth, nobody would notice that temporary dissonance as long as it kept moving or resolved in the appropriate way. Now that we're thinking that there are really no avoid notes on these sus chords, let's look at a couple of ways that these might appear in tunes. The first place that you commonly see sus chords is just as a substitute for the 5. So for example, in a 1-6-2-5, maybe the 5 chord is a sus chord rather than a dominant chord. There's a lot of reasons this could be. This could be because of the notes that are in the melody. This could just be the sound that the composer wanted. This could just be the type of dominant chord that the musicians happen to play on that time through the form. Whatever it is, when I see sus chords in these like super functional ways, especially if it's a short 2-5, meaning the 2-5 takes up one measure, I don't even really think about them as sus chords a lot of times, unless I want that sound. I really just freely think about them as either a dominant chord, maybe a dominant chord with alterations, possibly a sus chord if I want that sound, but I really just blow over top the entire thing, just like I would if it was a normal 1-6-2-5 or whatever. So let's look at just a little example. We're gonna do this in the key of E flat, just a couple repetitions through, and I'm just going to improvise over this. There's going to be no special attention to that chord being a sus chord. There might be an occasional little crunch where I hit a D natural on that B flat chord instead of an E flat. But again, there is dissonance in jazz all the time. As long as it resolves, it's all going to be good. So I definitely landed on some major thirds on those sus chords, and it wasn't the end of the world. The other thing I would add is that if you're playing with sort of competent rhythm section players, they might adjust to you. You know, if they start to hear that you're not playing really that sus sound on those chords, they'll probably start playing dominant on it, and it will all be more inside at that point. All right, let's look at another example that is still kind of in the realms of functional harmony. Let's look at the bridge of All the Things You Are. This is a common tune that people like to substitute a sus chord over some of this bridge. So let's just break it down a little bit. What we have is we have a 2-5-1 to G major and then a 2-5-1 to E major. It is not uncommon for that entire first 4 bars to just be treated as a D sus. So we're sort of like cramming that D sus over that entire G key area, and then we just go to a B sus in the next 3 bars and then finally resolve back to C7 to get us back to F minor at the top of the A section. So when we get to these sort of places where we have longer chunks of sus chords, this can be a really great place to employ sort of the sus sound, or what we might think of as quartal shapes. Not chordal with a C, but quartal with a Q. These sort of shapes take advantage of the fourth nature of sus chords. Now, since we have these fourths, we can build all these kind of unique and interesting sounding little cells off of them. This can give a lot of fertile ground towards building interesting sort of quote-unquote modern sounding ideas on these sus chords that are very motive based versus scale based. So let's check out what this would sound like on this bridge. Again, this is one of the sounds that I love to employ. You could really employ this on any sus chord, but when we have these like longer sections of chords, especially that move, in this case, kind of in a static way, it's like D7, and then the entire thing moves down a third to a B7, or B sus, excuse me. It can be really great to kind of keep that sound consistent across those 2 areas, and then eventually, you know, you get into that C7 to push you back to F minor. All right, and then finally we get to a tune like Maiden Voyage, where the sus chords no longer really work as functional harmony or a substitution for functional harmony. They work as sort of a color that we as the improviser get to kind of work as our backdrop. This is where you really want to be aware of sort of the options that are available to you and make sure you stick with one option for enough time that you really land that sound. You should think of these as sort of sounds that you're creating. That quartal sound that we just played would be an option here as well. That gives you a pretty specific type of sound. People might also play a major 7 chord off of the flat 7. So for example, the first chord is a D7, D sus, excuse me. And so we might play kind of melodies based on a C major 7 sound on top of that D chord, because that is one of the common ways that you can voice a sus chord. And you want to stick with that long enough that you really land that sound before you move on. Let's look at 2 sound options that we can use on sus chords. The first is the one that I think is most commonly overlooked by many players, again, because of this avoid note sort of stigma, and that is just playing the Mixolydian mode and creating melodies within it. Yes, you might have to be a little thoughtful about your note choices and when you really like lean on a major third, when you resolve, all that type of stuff. But there's a ton of ideas you can build in Mixolydian that will sound great on these chords. Let's just hear a little example of how this sound works on the A sections of Maiden Voyage. All right, our second option that we're going to delve into today is using minor pentatonics. There are a couple of minor pentatonics that you can actually apply on sus chords, again, to find some different shapes in there that'll be melodic. The one that I usually go to the most is building off of the 5th note of whatever key I'm in. For the first chord, it's a D sus chord, so the 5th note would be an A. So I'm going to think about an A minor pentatonic as sort of the scale basis of how I'm going to build melodies. That's going to give me access to all of that pentatonic information that I've hopefully practiced and have in my ear. In all honesty, this is really kind of my go-to way of playing over these longer sus chords, is by thinking about pentatonics. But it is by no means the only way. And actually, a lot of these things will get you to similar note choices. For example, pentatonics have a lot in common with that quartal way of thinking. And so you get similar note choices, but the shapes that are created by the two things might be very different. So again, really have some clarity in your mind about what sound you're going for. Stick with that sound long enough that it actually lands. All right, let's check it out on, again, the A sections of Maiden Voyage. This is using our pentatonic. So that's going to be an A minor pentatonic on the D chord and a C minor pentatonic on the F chord. All right, that does it for today. Hopefully that gives you some focused ways to think about playing over sus chords. I know for me, this has been an area that I've really had to practice over the years to kind of get it together. A lot of that is because I tend to be somebody who's really stuck in their own head when they improvise, and all of these different options tends to cloud what I'm trying to play rather than focus it. So if that is you, really think about, can I choose one sound on this chord? Play that for a little while, maybe the next chord move to a different sound, or maybe stick on the same sound for that next chord and then move somewhere else. Really try to be organized with how you're building melodies. It will help your solos have a lot more focus, a lot more clarity, and a lot more direction as you're playing. All right, see you in the woodshed.